We're just thrilled to have Dick be our keynote speaker this evening, and so please join me in welcoming Dick Ober to the podium.
Thank you very much, David, for that introduction, and to the entire Antioch community for the invitation to speak. It's hard to imagine a higher honor or a better assignment for me to be able to speak tonight about service, about community, about this beloved Monadnock region, and about this institution, and to be part of recognizing the three extraordinary people who will be honored. I confess that I knew very little, read nothing, about Horace Mann before being asked to be here tonight. My colleague, Jen Perkins, in my office did some research, and she came into my office about a week ago, and she was trembling. And she was filled with goosebumps, and she said, "You have to hear about who this person was." She had read his bio and shared some quotes: abolitionist, congressman, founding president of this institution. That alone says plenty about the spirit of service that we're here tonight for. But what really stuck out for me was that Horace Mann was considered the father of the American public education system. I actually thought my father was the father of the American public education system. One of those quotes that so inspired Jen and me was this: "Education, then, beyond all other devices of human origin, is the great equalizer of the conditions of men, the balance wheel of the social machinery." It's an extraordinary line, and it made me think about my own father. The bio that we gave David today doesn't include the role that, for me, has been most significant for the past couple of months, and that is the son of Nathaniel Ober. My dad died 2 months ago. He had devoted his life to four things: his family, his woodlot, his community, and public education. In 1965, my father was principal of a high school in St. Louis. I was 5 years old. He faced a decision: to be safe in his job or to live his values. He chose the latter. Although the school board had made it clear he might not be employed when he returned, he went to Montgomery, Alabama on March 25th, 1965, to march with Dr. King. He wrote an essay to explain his decision in case they did fire him, which they didn't. As part of my own grieving process, I'm going to read a piece of this to you tonight. And because the minute I heard more about Horace Mann, it just clicked about my dad. My father wrote in 1965, "As a schoolman, I believe it is essential that I personally demonstrate to my faculty and my students that a school is not a neutral institution. A school is a community of human beings, a community of human beings. And as such, it has a point of view and it stands for something. And when the chips are down, that institution will take a stand and have the stand recorded." In a very simple sense, I, as an educator, was trying to practice what I preach. As an American, I went to Montgomery out of enlightened self-interest. I believe with absolute conviction that when the rights of any of us are denied, then the rights of all of us are threatened. It has been a long time since I witnessed mankind as full of grace and goodness as he was during the March on Montgomery on March 25th, 1965. 9 months later, my father moved us to Minneapolis. He had accepted the job as superintendent of secondary education in Minneapolis under one condition: that he be allowed to oversee the integration of that city's high schools, which he did. Perhaps what Horace Mann might have called a victory for humanity in our little corner of the world. He spent his career in public education with a focus always on the most racially troubled districts in the country. In retirement, he spent 25 years splitting his time between being a tree farmer and serving his community: Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Historical Society, Cemetery Commission. I tell that story out of pride for my father, but also out of deep gratitude and love for him and for my mother, for creating an atmosphere in my childhood home, where spirit of service and community was simply a part of life. It wasn't something you did on the side, it's what you did. Just as it is here at Antioch. So when I think of the spirit of community service in the Monadnock region, I picture town meetings and select boards, farmers markets and CSAs, open space protection and environmental education. And I can't think of any of those things without thinking of Antioch, because you are woven into the fabric of this community. And I thank you for that, because I'm a part of the community as well. And of course, I think about the people here, because at all those places I just mentioned, I see people connected with Antioch. Scores that I've known over the years. I think about the people I have had the good fortune of hiring who have embodied the spirit of Horace Mann. People like Margaret Liska, outside of David Carroll, the most devoted turtle advocate I've ever known. Rosemary Conroy, I think 1992, had amazing talent to connect people with the natural world through words and color. Kristen Grubbs, these names will be familiar to some of you, one of the smartest and the kindest people I've ever worked with, whose commitment to whatever she's doing for her community is contagious. And an Antioch grad, former colleague at the Monadnock Conservancy, of whom I am inordinately fond and proud, Emily Haig of Ware, New Hampshire. Someone who personifies for me New Hampshire and Antioch. Naturalist, artist, land steward, genuine, passionate, talented, and a work ethic, a Yankee work ethic that just won't quit. And then there are those beyond students that I've had the pleasure of hiring and working with whom I've worked side by side and consider friends and mentors. This list could go very long. I'm going to name three. Jack Calhoun and his talent for community conversations and municipal leadership. Meade Caddo, whose deep connections with the natural world and his tireless drive to protect it has inspired 2 generations of Monadnock residents. And of course, my friend, my predecessor in this extraordinary job I have the privilege of holding, former dean and provost here for more than a decade before coming to the foundation, the irreplaceable, the irrepressible Lou Feldstein. Simply one of the great human beings. So it's a good thing that we are well endowed with these qualities of humanity, service, and community, because they are more valuable and more needed today than ever, because these are hard, hard times. The steady grind of economic malaise, punctuated with crisis after crisis in the markets, is taking its toll. Poverty is growing faster, we now know, than at any point in the last 30 years. In Manchester, 25% of the children live in poverty. That has doubled in the last decade. The income gap is widening. Opportunities for the middle class are narrowing. Real income in the middle class has risen only 10% in 35 years. It has become flat. Income for 15 to 24-year-olds has dropped 10% in just the past 2 years. Economists and demographers see what's happening, and now it's starting to sink into the public consciousness. The baby boom generation is the last that will do as well or better than our parents. It is very clear. And people are starting to see that. And it's not just the economy. I think that Americans are feeling unmoored from the institutions that have so long anchored us. Our collective trust in the 4 pillars of American life: government, financial markets, organized religion, and media are at all-time lows. In the midst of this, of course, we are seeing a tremendous shift in the public sector, a fundamental realignment of government's role. I don't think this is temporary. I think this is the new real. Federal fiscal policy presses down on states. State fiscal policy presses down on municipalities, on nonprofits, on universities, on hospitals. This downshifting will have profound, long-term, real impacts on education, on health care, and on the least advantaged among us. Until this year, the New Hampshire state budget had never changed more than 1% in any 1 year. In any 2 years, excuse me. In a two-year budget cycle, it never changed by 1%. This year, it was reduced by 11%. I'm not here to pass judgment on that or to talk about the politics around that. That's an entirely different evening. It's the uncertainty in that worries me and many people with whom I speak. Doctors don't know how many sick people will end up in expensive local emergency rooms if preventive treatment is denied because of proposed reductions in community health centers' children's insurance programs. Business leaders know that costs resulting from insufficient Medicaid reimbursement will be shifted to business in the form of higher insurance premiums. They just don't know how much it will hamper job growth. Uncertainty. Experts and families touched by substance use disorders, something that's hugely important to our foundation, question the frugality of cutting a prevention and treatment fund that comes from a tiny percentage of state liquor sale profits, a highly leveraged investment that saves far more than it costs. And of course, parents wonder what level of reduction our public universities and community colleges can absorb before tuition hikes will price them out of a higher education. The list goes on. Judges worry that justice will be unavailable to many residents now that the state has ended its support for New Hampshire legal assistance. Law enforcement leaders warn that cutbacks in mental health funding will mean increases in crime and incarceration. Health officials question the long-term costs of dramatically cutting state testing of the water that we swim in and drink. And our elderly, our disabled, our homeless, and our hungry neighbors are asking the most poignant question of all: who among us will be left behind? In these unsettled times, our neighbors are looking for anchors and they're looking for beacons in this uncertain sea. Philanthropy is one of them. We will be positioning our foundation to help the independent charitable sector that is so woven into the fabric of life in this state to succeed in a very different world. Anchors and beacons. Higher education is one of them. And perhaps of all these anchors and beacons, the spirit embodied in those we are honoring tonight, the spirit of community service, is the most important as we work through these very difficult times. And it's in that spirit that I offer my gratitude, my admiration to Julie, Jim, and Gargi. I'm going to close on a higher note. I'm going to close by recalling Governor Gregg's Commission on New Hampshire in the 21st Century, which convened 20 years ago. My first mentor and my boss at the time, Paul Boffinger, co-chaired that commission with Cotton Cleveland. Lou was a member, as were now Chief Justice Linda DeLeonis, John Harrigan, Signe McQuaid of the Union Leader family, Harold Janeway, Susan Leahy, Bernie Streeter, Jim Varnum, the list goes on. So these commission members were asked in 1991 to look ahead into the 21st century. What are our challenges? What does it look like? They had markedly different backgrounds and views, but they understood New Hampshire and its values, and they found remarkable common ground. Their final report was titled simply, New Hampshire, My Responsibility. New Hampshire, My Responsibility. The country, the world, my responsibility. And in this report lay the seeds of many of the public-private partnerships that have defined our state in civic engagement for the last 20 years. Now remember, this commission did its work in 1991 during a recession that for New Hampshire was harder than this one. During that recession, 20,000 people fled the state, 5 banks failed, and the state budget was falling way short. There was so much to divide us then as there is now. And yet these prominent citizens across the political spectrum and life experience focus not on those differences, but on their shared responsibility, on their spirit of community service. I'll close with a quote from this report that has always stayed with me. People come to New Hampshire or stay in New Hampshire to be independent. We discover, paradoxically, that independence requires a community effort. Under the mainstream of rugged individualism, there has always been a practical current of interdependence and cooperation. As New Hampshire continues to grow, our sense of mutual dependence must become as strong as our independence, or we'll lose both. Wise words 20 years ago. We need to heed them now. We need to remind ourselves, we need to remind our neighbors that with independence and rights becomes community and responsibility. And these three people being honored tonight in their own way embody that for us all. Thank you.